Well, hey, welcome to Denver's quarterly office hours. We're super grateful to have you all here today. For those that don't know, this is being brought to you by AmPhil, now AmPhil. We've officially rebranded from American Philanthropic to now AmPhil, kind of like Federal Express went to FedEx. So it's kind of fun. And I am joined here. I am your hostess with the mostest, Ben Doming. I serve as the managing consultant for the Denver office, and just so grateful to wake up every day and to serve with AmPhil and our serve our clients. Live here in the we have our office in downtown Littleton, but we work with clients all across the country, helping them do strategic development planning and foundations and capital campaigns and the like. So I get to run the Denver office, which is really fun. I have 10 years in fundraising experience and with a master's in within an MBA with a concentration in philanthropy, which is kind of fun. So, and I am joined by my amazing co-host, Mary Callan, and she comes to us with over 30 years of both global corporate and nonprofit leadership experience. So super blessed to have her on today's call. Can you introduce yourself for a second, Mary?
Sure. It's great to be here, Ben. I'm working remotely, but I am a senior consultant working with Ben out of the Littleton office. So yeah, come with a few decades of fundraising experience, both corporate and nonprofit. I've worked for small nonprofits and large multinationals, so the whole gamut. And so if you're coming to us from a small place, we can speak to some of that during our session today. Done religious nonprofits and secular. So and happy to chime in whenever. So I'll be peppering Ben with a few questions here through our hour. And feel free to chime in with questions. I'll keep an eye out for them too.
Absolutely. Yep. And Mary's right. We always the Denver office hours kind of morphed because what we wanted to do is we wanted to offer our clients and friends in the industry just an opportunity to tune in with fun tidbits on areas to help you guys both friend raise and fundraise more because you guys serve such great missions. So we wanted to give that as a value offering to our clients and friends in the industry and just a way to check in and see what's the latest. So we're always happy to take questions. Additionally, if anything from here struck you or you've ever wanted to reach out and set up a time to chat with myself, Mary, or anyone else from our team, please, there'll be an email follow-up. And with this time, you'll receive a free hour consulting. Happy to provide that to you where it's kind of our joy and we just love what we do to do that. So great. Well, without further ado, I'll go ahead and share slides for our time today. So as promised, this is the new donor welcome study. So which is pretty exciting. It is a look at how 147 nonprofits treat donors from different channels during the first 90 days. This was a joint study produced with you'll see our tree in the bottom right, American Philanthropic, now AmPhil. But we did a study along with Next After, which is a group primarily specializing in digital marketing and for nonprofits. So if you're interested in beefing that up, you can work with us and or them. We have a great relationship with them and help facilitate that introduction if need. So one point before we go on is we have a lot of slides. We have a lot of content for this, right? It's a big study and I'm trying to break it down into bite-sized chunks. So there's probably, 4 or 5 kind of tidbits that we'll kind of stop on. Picture me as a tour guide that we're going to be all journeying today together, but I'll try to stop and emphasize a few key critical points. So with that, and then we'll open it up for questions towards the end. So awesome. So the first thing is, well, why analyze the new donor welcome experience, right? Why should we? Well, part of it is we turn to we'll start with what we know, right? Which is online, which is donor retention. And if you're looking overall, online donor retention, this is taken from M&R benchmarks, on average is about 36%, right? On average between the different types of nonprofits. But for new donors, so if you just get a new donor at one time, there's only a 23% likelihood that they'll stay on for another gift, right? For that retention rate. So 1 out of every 4 will stay on roughly. But if you get them to give a second gift, that jumps up to about 60%, right? So prior donors, right? So if they get 2 subsequent gifts, about 60%. Additionally, so that was for an online donor. Offline, this is taken from Blackbaud, which is the company that brings off to Razor's Edge, which is a CRM. They noticed that 29% is a first year offline only donor retention rate. So you get acquire a new donor. But if you get them to give a second gift or multi-year, that retention jumps up to about 60%, right? So what we're going to use for the sake of our purposes today is a 60% retention rate, right? The reason being, if we can capitalize on a second gift strategy and get them to give that second time, the likelihood of them falling off the bandwagon decreases significantly. So looking at that, right? Well, we'll start off. We'll pretend we have donors with no acquisition. We're not going to acquire any more donors. We'll just keep the donors we have. So year 1, you're going to have 10,000 multi-year donors. Year 2, you only have 6,000. But by year 5, you have 1,200 left. And by year 10, you practically have no donors left. So the reason that you not only want to acquire donors, but retain them is because they matter. They're the lifeblood of your organization, right? I like to think of the matrix, the red pill, the blue pill, right? If you're offered a fixed retention or more acquisition, and you could only choose one pill, obviously you should choose both if you could. But if you have limited resources, ideally you want to fix retention. That's what's key, right? Is not only keeping donors, but upgrading donors over time. So let's start with, well, how do you do it? How do you fix retention? Well, let's look at some frameworks before we jump into the research. Some frameworks that we know is that there's a significant second gift opportunity in a new donor's first 90 days. You'll notice that at minimum, a third, depending on the type of donor or for what organization, higher ed, social services, or missions, or charity, faith-filled organizations. In the first 90 days, there's a 30% or more likelihood that the donor will give you a second gift, which is huge.
So that's saying, Ben, that if you look at that first 12 months, those first 90 days are the best time to ask again. And I think a lot of nonprofits back off as soon as they get that first gift, thinking, oh, well, we don't want to pester. But that's when the new donor is, they've just given to you, they're in love, they're on your honeymoon with you. So they're very happy to hear from you again. Absolutely.
And this is, I would say this is donors who are willing, right? Like they're trying to show their willingness and their excitement of being engaged in your organization, without necessarily a direct marketing push, right? So that they've already shown that they are responsive, right? Now, one really cool slide I thought was awesome is new donors who receive a phone call within 90 days are nearly 25% more likely to retain. This is huge, right? Now, we're going to talk specifically in strategies in terms of email and mail and the marketing mix, if you will. But given the opportunity to call donors, you should, right? And obviously, we'll talk later about what benchmark that might be, that you should call them and say thank you. But the likelihood jumps up to nearly 58%, right? If you have more than one phone call, it's just so it's incredible. People want to know that you're grateful. Obviously, everybody knows the more that you email, right, your open rate and your click-through rate will go down, your click-to-open rate will go down, right? But that should be caveated with welcome email rates are 42% higher than the average email, right? So like, that's what you need to say is like, yeah, your email, once they've supported you, the likelihood that they'll read that email that they get from you is actually a lot higher. So be bold in that. So anyway, so that's
and as you're emailing, that the last graph showed a lot of emails, and not everyone reads every email, and you'll see the open rate drops over time if you're sending a rapid fire, and also your click-through rates drop. So one thing to do is as you're emailing people is keep an eye on, know what your past average open rate is for your organization and your past click-through, and you'll see if you're emailing more often now after you see this webinar, watch those open rates and click-through rates. And if they really start plummeting, just kind of rein yourself in. And if you're wondering what kind of average for nonprofits overall, about a 38% open rate overall is really decent. So if you're faith-based, you might get a little higher, like 43%. So that's something to kind of shoot for, is at least 30%. But if things start plummeting, then you can adjust. But just keep an eye on those open rates, and MailChimp and all those guys are pretty easy to monitor those things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's some of the framework for the study, right? Well, some background before that. And ultimately, we wanted to test this hypothesis. The way donors are welcome can directly impact their value and likelihood of retention. We wanted to test that, and how could we accomplish that? So how do we analyze the new donor welcome experience? Well, we donated $20 online to 130 organizations, and we donated $20 via mail to 130 organizations. But hold up, you'd say, wait, I thought in the survey, I thought you donated to 147 organizations, and you'd be correct. The reality is what we found was, this is crazy. Some organizations didn't have a donation page, or they tried three times, and we had a processor error, or we couldn't complete. We got it just didn't work, or the check we mailed that we mailed wasn't cashed. So take note of that, right? That one of the first things I appreciate about Mary is when we sign a new client, the first thing that she does is she goes online to make a donation and to see the donation process, right? So please know, and there's multiple things. We had a client who, for whatever reason, the gift would be processed.
Okay. I didn't know if it was just me seeing Ben freeze, or oh, he's frozen. Okay, let me go ahead and try to get him up, because he's got the slides up there, and I think he was up. Are you all seeing Ben, or just me? Just see me. Okay. Well, Ben was talking about how giving online, and I actually test to see what the online experience is like when people go on and see what kind of thank yous we get. And if I get an actual receipt that says how much I've been donating. But and the testing was done, and Ben will likely catch up with us. Somebody says, tell us about yourself. Well, I'll tell you about our presentation. So let's see if I can bring up let's see if I can bring this up. Yeah, I should have taken the red pill. I'll tell you what, let me see if I can share my screen while Ben's trying to get back online. And let me see if I can try to. Oops. There. So now you all should be seeing a few of these things. Let me see if I can skip forward here. All right. Okay, great. Well, I'll go ahead and pick up, and when Ben chimes in, I'll turn it back over to him. So we sent all these donations between February and May. We figured there were no profound things going on in the world during that time, and there's no like end of year effect for any of this. And just so you know, donor personas, we went online and postal, so there were donations that were given separately. And these were various communication channels. And we'll focus a lot today on postal donors and email donors. So, and the types of communications are either solicitations where we're actually asking for a donation, or a cultivation where it's just information, or we might offer some kind of offer online, whether like a PDF or something like that, or some ebook or something. So the number of organizations that were given to really ranged widely, but you can see now, keep this in mind as we go forward in the data, because you can see that there's a large array, and some of them even international. But what's really interesting is that more than half of these organizations were pretty big. I mean, if you've worked in nonprofits like I have, you know, a $10 million nonprofit to me is a pretty good size. So over half of these organizations were a decent size. So what was the overall experience like? After donating, we got a bunch of emails and not quite as many postal mails, as you can imagine, right? So the postal people really did not get communicated with as much. And part of that can be because a postal donor may not have given their email address, and plus postage is expensive, right? So people will tend to respond as an organization to donors online. And the number of emails that were given per week over this whole period of time varied. And there's actually quite a few emails, as you can see, from organizations. So the online donor, obviously it's easy to communicate with them. So they got a lot more communication overall compared with a postal donor. And the total communication kept increasing over time. But the total volume of communication really doesn't tell you the whole story here. And in fact, some of them came rapid fire. You've probably experienced this. One organization sent 11 emails within a single week. Now, you might expect this from companies, right? But not so often from nonprofits. So the number of organizations emailing each week varied out of that whole 130, right? So we were seeing at least a third to a half at any given week, and particularly at the front end, and then it would drop off a little bit. And again, that, you know, you're trying to catch people when they're the most interested, right? By week 2, it drops again. And for the postal donor, obviously, there's a reason that there's a lag, right? Because it takes a while to get that donation in and start things flowing and get someone entered into the system if you're going to communicate with them in any manner, for post or email. And the channels by which we were seeing communications varied too, right? Email only was really heavy, right? Almost 20% sent nothing to the online donor in the first 3 months, which is kind of surprising because it's so easy to contact an online donor. Okay. So 20%, which is not bad, sent both email and postal, and only 8% sent direct mail. That's kind of a little bit more expected. And then 52% used only email with their online donors. Personally, I always sent both a postal acknowledgement and an email acknowledgement to an email donor. I just like to communicate a lot. So if we look at how we communicate with the postal donor, then 11% used email and direct mail. So that's, again, not too different from an online donor. 23% communicated with the postal donor by direct mail only. Again, you've got to see what kind of information you get. But the really surprising point here, rather than beating down a lot of numbers, is that almost half of the organizations sent nothing to the postal donor in the first 90 days, which is really astounding. Now, if you're at a small nonprofit, I've been in your shoes where you're a one-man band, and it's sometimes you're juggling so many things. It's so easy to have that slip, isn't it? So, but it's surprising that many were not heard from after 90 days. So what this tells you too is that if you communicate with your first time donor like that within that first 90 days, you are automatically going to rise head and shoulders above your competition per se, or your peers, right? And if you communicate really well, you'll really stand out. So someone asked on here, would you recommend contacting a first-time donor that only gives $20? And personally, I contact every donor somehow, even at $20. And in fact, some tidbits about bequest donors and even major donors. Many major donors start out with a very small gift, sometimes a little test drive just to poke and see how things go. And many bequest donors start out with small donations, and then a lot of them will maybe go to a regular donation, which might not be large. Sometimes as little as $5 or $20, but sometimes you can end up with very sizable bequests from those. So you never know what gold is in there, even in those small donors at the beginning. So do everything you can to reach out to a donor. And if it's only email or a phone call because that's cheaper, then go ahead and do it, and get some help with the phone calls too. Those really make a huge difference. So now I have here's Ben, but I have a question. It says, can you talk about the size of the donation? How much do you think affected the direct communication attempts with a larger organization? That could very well be, and I don't know that we have information on that. Hey, Ben, can you hear me?
I can. I'm so sorry, everyone.
No worries.
Computer internet just crashed, and with it my computer went. So for whatever reason, I am so sorry for all those that were tuning in.
No worries. We just kept rolling on. I hope you don't mind. And we've got a lot of great questions. And here's one, maybe Ben. It says, if we could talk about the size of the donation in the experiment. What was the size of the donation that was used in the experiment? Was it 20?
$20 via mail, and then $20 online. So
okay, and because somebody was asking, maybe that's why some of these larger organizations didn't respond, because they might think that's a small contribution. But we just talked about, Ben, how it's important to acknowledge those, because you never know who those major donors are. Sometimes they give small, right, at first.
Totally. Yeah, that's a great point. For whoever brought it up. I think the biggest thing is how are you acknowledging them, right? Like one of my favorite stories was somehow we had a wealth screen on someone that, we had a wealth screen come through on a prospect, and lo and behold, it was higher. And so I reached out, and they had their largest gift might have been $250. And I led with, thank you so much for your donation. And they said, Ben, we had sent in 3 $10,000 gifts and 1 $250 gift, but you were the only one to call. Now, granted, I didn't call explicitly for that gift, but I think it paints the need for, adds color to the fact that we need an engagement strategy. Yes, it's $20, but typically major donors are going to come in at a much smaller tier before they launch in with a $5,000 gift or $10,000 gift. They want to see how they're stewarded and what the process is like. So.
Do you want me to keep rolling through the slides from my end, Ben, and you can speak to them? Or
I've got it here. What slide are you on?
Let's see. On what kinds of communications? I don't have a slide number. Slide 34, I think.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I'm gonna stop sharing then. Okay.
Yep, that sounds great.
There you go. Thanks for your patience, everyone.
Yeah, thank you all. So here, let me
always have.
Share it. Great. Awesome. So we're going to take a view of Mary just finished what the overall experience was like. But these are some of the kinds of communications that were sent to do notice, right? We don't need to sit here all day and kind of tread in this water, but wanted to kind of just briefly touch on some of the communications, right? You'll notice that the way that the online and postal donor, what was sent out to them was that 47%, the lion's share of to the online donor was an appeal, whereas the lion's share to the postal donor was actually heavy cultivation. So that's pretty interesting that they were a bit different, right? Looking at thank you messages, you'll see that 76 digital receipts were sent to the online donor, and then along with 73 digital thank yous, and then you'll see 4 and 4. And so just a brief note on thank you notes and digital receipts. Well, I think a lot of times that people think, oh, you know what, I sent them a thank you, when in fact, it's just a receipt, right? And they get the receipt and they say, oh, thank you so much for the, they don't say, wow, this organization truly values my gift. What they think is, awesome, I'm going to take this and file it away for the IRS, right? Especially for gifts over $250 per IRS guidelines, right? But truly, we also want to have some mix of a thank you with their digital, in addition to their receipt of giving, right? And so Penelope Burke, who's kind of a thought leader in this regard, she says the donor needs to hear 3 things before they're ready to give again, which is that you've received the gift, you've allocated it appropriately to the initiative that they want, and then lastly, that you're grateful. And yeah, a receipt, it says that you acknowledge it, but that's really for their tax purposes. But once you've answered most of those 3 things, donors are more inclined to give you a gift then, right? That you received it, it's going, and it's, I like to say, it sounds cheesy, but your gift is already hard at work, right? Brief look at cultivations versus appeals, right? There were 4 weeks where we received more cultivation than solicitations, which was interesting. And the cultivation to solicitation ratio, we had about 1 cultivation for 1.05 solicitations that we received for online donors. Offline donors, different story. Post donors received communication were likely to receive a higher ratio of cultivation to solicitations, going back to that pie chart that we showed you earlier, right? So we had, for every 1 cultivation received, about half of those received a solicitation. Which led us to our second key finding, which is organizations have vastly different approaches to welcoming online and offline donors. And I like that person's point earlier, but yeah, it was a $20 gift, but have you and your leadership thought through and done is it the word I'm looking for, a thought tree in terms of how you're going to receive these gifts, and then what your plan of engagement for the donor is. A lot of times it's not really, it hasn't been thought through yet. So, and qualified. A closer look at appeals, what types of appeals that were coming in, right? You'll see that the types of appeal was 77% was heavy on donation, with 11% being product and merchandise, as well as inviting to events, which was pretty interesting, right? These are some of the appeal types: to come to our events, come to our gala, buy tickets, purchase merchandise, what that looks like. Appeals per week, kind of, you'll notice that 32% of donation appeals used a matching offer to try to win in second donation, which is not a bad, right? Once again, we're just simply reporting, right? We're gonna give some advice in terms of what we think could be most helpful. This is not a bad strategy. I know it works really well towards year-end giving to leverage this, so it's not a bad strategy per se. 17% of donations appeals ask for a recurring donation, which is also a great strategy if you're trying to build out, especially if you have some type of segmentation for this population and you know something about them. If you're able to well screen these people and see that they're on the lower tiers of giving, but they would make great monthly recurring donors. All right, this is just some information on matching, asking for a match, purchase, ask for a recurring gift, postal donor to an online donor. Obviously, the online donor is receiving that much more information. number of emails asking for a match per week, types of matching gifts, right? We were just trying to give you a few examples. Now, a closer look at cultivation. Here's kind of one I would like to swim the deep end with you for a little bit. The first thing to note is the vast majority of cultivation emails we received were newsletters, heavy on information. And then the 69% of cultivation messages received were informational in nature. Right. And so we're talking about what we mean is newsletters, like here's who we are, this is an update on our mission. One organization sent us 86 newsletters in the first 90 days.
That's a lot.
It's a lot. Right? And you have stories of impact, which is awesome. And 31% of cultivation messages ask for some sort of direct action beyond reading an article, right? Which is asking them, right? And so what do those look like? Those look like a free course, sign this petition and act now, right? Which is all great calls to action. We received 24 petitions from the Innocent Project. Other types of cultivation messages were surveys and quizzes. That's a quiz, that's a survey, obviously. But here's we found for the key finding. There's lost opportunity here, right? So most cultivation communication is informational nature. And there's a second gift opportunity by leveraging more offers. So offers such as a free ebook or survey. In one email welcome series experiment that Next After conducted, sharing more email offers like an ebook or survey led to an instant donation page, led to a 920% increase in donations compared to the control, right?
Yeah, that's a huge increase. So the real point, right, Ben, is to offer value, right? And you know, it's great to share information, but you know, people are bludgeoned with words these days, right? So it's sort of like if you've ever been in a conversation with someone who talks about themselves all the time, right? It's like, no, well, let's hear from you. What do you think about me, right?
Totally,
So you
totally.
want to offer value, and you can tailor it to your organization too. Like if you're faith-based, you might offer a downloadable PDF of a prayer or something. It could be checklists, it could be handy tips, it could be, you know, things of do's and don'ts depending on your organization. You can get creative, and the idea is not to make it something, you know, like that's really going to cost you a lot, but something that someone would value, right? Because then they feel like they're getting value, and then they know every email they get or every letter they get is not just going to be an ask, right?
Absolutely. It's a great point, Mary. One of my old bosses used to have this kind of cheesy saying, but I like it, which was, we want to be a blessing to you as you are to us, right? We don't want to just be the leech, the nonprofit leech just attached to your wallet or your purse strings, right? We want to give you value back to who you are and recognize you as an individual. And I think that's what this is tapping into, right? And what that looks like is, you know, you have an advertisement or some kind of thing that brings them to a landing page, right? Whether it be an email or if you're advertising online with an email offer of an ebook that you have to capture their data, that links to an instant donation page, right? That's the key. So other findings from the welcome series communication that were interesting and of note, right? Which was in terms of emails, whether it be cultivation, appeal, or receipt, we're finally getting the memo. Nonprofits are finally getting the memo up to use customized text, which is awesome, right? To not just be so high and dry. What I mean by plain text emails is something like this, right? It just looks like no offense to anyone on the call, if you're everybody knows an attorney, but it looks like it was written by an attorney, right? With that Times New Roman font, nothing pops out, right? It just kind of looks bland, right? Now, at the same time, right, you know, where is the answer? You know, we talk about the answer more than likely lies in the middle, right? So now this was an interesting study that we found, was that, you know, you could have the control, which is, you know, hyper designed, stand with trust, stand with local reporting, and one day to raise $1 million. which is great. And then that you had this treatment over here, which is the same letter without heavy graphics. And typically we would think, well, the design performed well. In all actuality, this plain treatment actually increased by 29%. Right?
Yeah.
It's still visually appealing, but it is not hyper, doesn't have a ton of logos and stuff. Anything you want to share on that, Mary?
Yeah, and I think this is a good lesson because a lot of us, especially if we first started using Canva and then MailChimp and Emma and all those wonderful email service providers, it's real easy to do graphics, and we think for us it looks so visually appealing and would be interesting, and it kind of is, but there's two problems there, right? We send so much of this now that when people see that, their brain automatically says, oh, this organization, they're asking for something, right? Whereas when you get an email from a friend or someone you know, they don't send you a lot of, designy graphics, right? They send you something a little more plain. And the plain actually is easier, it's usually faster to read. And the other thing, those graphic heavy emails will tend to land more in your spam folders of your receivers too. So you got kind of have a double whammy. And an almost 30% increase in donations by toning down on those graphics is a big jump in donations.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the answer lies in the middle. Don't have to be a creative art director, but please don't just have standardized Times New Roman font, if you will. Also an interesting piece on videos, right? Most people tend to think, oh, videos, we need to hit them with a video, right? It was both used for cultivation and appeal. Here's an interesting study though. You have two different landing pages for the same organization. They tried a video-based donation page and a text-based donation page. And most people think, man, the video is going to speak to them and they'll be that much more excited to give a gift. And in fact, they're going to double their gift when they see the donation, the video. Actually, though, text-based donation pages actually outperform by 527% in donations. Frank, in all honesty, when we meet with clients and they have a video on their donation page, we say, take it off. And if anything to learn from this, though, while we say do have text, please limit the amount of text. In fact, Mary and I were chatting earlier, this is too much text, frankly.
Yeah, it really is.
And the reason being that video-based donation pages don't perform as well, because typically we want to have a really solid video, like a 3-minute or 5-minute video or even longer, that they're going to the mission's really going to speak to them and they're really going to love it. But in all actuality, what happens is they start watching the video. When they start watching the video, we've created friction for them to submit their gift, right? What we use in our line of work, we call it friction, right? You want them to say, here's the opportunity to give and make it happen. And all of a sudden,
no distractions.
Totally, no distractions, right? What happens is all of a sudden their boss calls them or their daughter says, oh my gosh, can you come watch the kids? And then they get sidetracked with making that gift, right? So we don't want to have any friction for them to make that gift.
Yeah, and I know video, in fact, we do a lot of surveys with clients when we first sign them on. And a lot of donors will say, oh, I love getting videos from this and this organization, like a lot of missionary organizations, but this is not the place, right, for that video. So do use video, especially warm, personalized, and they don't have to be all designy professional, or even just an iPhone, smartphone video, but use those maybe in your thank you email or Absolutely. a warm welcome email, right? So do use them, but these should be clean. There shouldn't even be on your donation pages, there shouldn't be links to any other place on your website. No links, take away the nav, just keep that monomaniacal focus on that donation form.
Absolutely, it's great input, Mary. So now in terms of who sent the email, I thought this was pretty interesting, right? We had 3 types of senders. We had the organization, a group, and an individual, right? So a group would be like so this was LLS matching grants, right? And then the organization would be Autism Speaks, or the actual organization itself. So that was pretty interesting that people are still using those. Now, one note on terms of, well, what performs better, organization or individual? This should be a no-brainer. That if you move to having it come from an individual, it'll increase by 27% on average in outputs, right? And I think that makes sense. Oh, this is just another one of their marketing blasts. I'll go ahead and delete it, right? Well, this is from Kent Lastman, right? Or someone tied to the organization that I actually really know or like or trust, right? And so you really want to make sure it's under as an individual sender. Some other interesting points from it were some calls to action, a number of both the appeal, cultivation, and even receipt had calls to action to follow people on social media, right? We have a LinkedIn, a Twitter, an Instagram to follow us on there. But so there was once again, there's a study. We found that when you're communicating to donors, this was the control on the left, and then the removing distracting links when following up with these donors. That 18% increase in donations for those if you just remove the distracting links. Going back to the landing page, we don't want to create friction. We don't want to multi-purpose a call to action or trying to solidify donations. And this was another key finding for us, right? Nearly half of appeals also ask donors to follow them on social media in the same communication. Remember, in the first 90 days, we want to solidify the next gift. We can then follow up and bring them deeper into the life of the organization, right? But the real big thing is getting their heart to be fully invested into this organization.
Yeah, and you can go ahead and ask people to follow you on social in your informational emails, right? Or your informational materials, not in a solicitation.
Absolutely. So we're gonna finish out here with two examples of new donor welcome series approaches, right? These were from two clients. This is just a overview. We're not picking on anyone here, right? So if you see an organization say, hey, I really like them, that's great. We do too. That's why we send them $20 or $40. But just some interesting notes, right? So everybody knows the American Heart Association. Well, they were very solicitation heavy, right? They had a mix of cultivations and solicitations. You'll notice that 3 days after the donation, we received a thank you receipt. We had 20 appeals though in 90 days, which is really high, and then 7 cultivations in 90 days, right? Which is great, right? But we're going to propose for today that there might be a better way, right? That's why we're kind of sharing this information, and we hope to offer this of value to you, right? Typically, right, we're using the control welcome series, right? Typically, people think they get a survey and then they get a survey from the donors, right? Some call to action, as well as an informational piece. That then they receive 3 stories of impact with a soft ask, right? Not necessarily a hard ask. Mary will give an example of that later. And then a direct appeal with a hard ask with a core value proposition of join us today for what we're trying to do. Excuse me. And then once they make that gift, we're then going to transition them, what we call transition them to live, right? They're going to be dumped in, right, to the house file mailings, right? From then on, we're going to communicate to them and standard. But our proposed solution would be something like this. This is the treatment, right? That they both receive, when a donor comes to you with a new gift, they both receive a call to action with a survey, and additionally an informational piece about them, about your organization, right? So they get both. And then at the same time, whether it be based on their survey, and they're, a lot of times it's easy to share this, and yes, there's some automation and some build outs that you can do. But even on a very limited scale and limited budget, there's a few small things that you can do for this, right? Then based on whether their survey and they really say they have a geographical preference or another aspect of your organization they would really programmatically that they would like to be a part of, that you give them some offer and you tailor some offer, whether it be video series, or a book offer. You'll see there's courses down here for this organization they built out, right? Or similar content. And then a pitch to them, right? About going back to that thing, right? The offer that is linked to a donation page, right? That they could then make a gift, and then we quote transition them to life.
Yeah, a couple of questions, Ben.
Yeah.
Someone's asking if we could give an example of a call to action survey.
Great. So sorry, and thank you for that. The call to actions, when I say call to action survey, the call to action of that email is the survey, right? Meaning you send them a piece and it's heavy on, we want to get to know you and we want to provide great value back to you, what you find interesting, right? So you actually just send them a survey in the email. So the call to action isn't necessarily making the donation, right? There's types of call to actions you can have: sign a petition, do the survey, follow us on social media.
Right. And if you're going to do surveys, it's really great for organizations to do donor surveys annually or on a regular basis. And it's good if you're doing surveys, don't always have them end in an ask. We get this a lot from political like campaigns, right? Take this survey. Do you think so-and-so should be impeached or whatever? And then it always asks for a $20 donation. Well, then what happens then is that you don't want to answer any more surveys. But a survey call to action could be to, you take a survey and then you could write a congressman, or you could, could be anything that's beyond an ask. And I think the offers that you're focusing on here, I think you're going to pull up a nice stat, right, on this next one.
Yeah. So you'll notice that this series of the donor welcome series is heavy on the organization focus, right? This is who we are. This is what we do, right? This is an offer focused welcome series, but I would almost tailor that and say this is donor centric welcome series, right? This really has the donor in mind, right? Going back to that, what we shared earlier, how can we as an organization offer value back to you, right? And with this study, with this organization, saw a 920% increase in donations, which is pretty crazy when they utilize this. Another example out there, if my screen's showing is Catholic Vote, right? Was pretty interesting. They're pretty much single channel only, right? They had the postal donor received one piece of communication, which was a receipt in the mail. The online donor received 92 emails in 90 days, including 72 newsletters, which is a lot. Which is interesting. But what's interesting about them is this organization sent a daily newsletter. Now, the newsletter that they send is not necessarily organizational focused, but actually offer focused. One of the things that their Catholic Vote tries to do is offer news from a Catholic angle that affects Catholics around the country. So it is a cultivation piece and it's an informational piece, but it's really an offer, right? If you think about it, right? They received an additional appeal nearly every week, though. So now, a word of caution on being single channel only. You can do it. You can save money being single channel. We don't necessarily recommend it, frankly. There are some people, based on budget constraints, say if you do have an issue, please just come to us if you're saying, hey, I don't think anybody's responding to our mail. We'd love to help chat through that with you. That 35% of emails from this organization ended up in the spam folder, right? So just keep that in mind. If you're going to do single channel only, that's fine. If it works for you, there are opportunities to save money, but I would say more often than not, people are giving in the mail. And so what we would hopefully ideally like to do is work with you to see those results better, right? So some summary of key findings, right? 45% of organizations did not communicate with the postal donor during the first 90 days. Organizations have vastly different approaches to welcoming online postal donors. Most cultivation communication is informative in nature rather than more active offers like ebooks and surveys. And nearly half of donation appeals include a prompt to follow the organization on social media. So I've talked enough. Mary's talked enough. Curious to be what questions might you all have?
keep an eye on the chat here. Yeah, while we're waiting for more questions, Ben, we might want to talk about the difference between a soft ask and a hard ask.
Yeah. Would
right?
you mind sharing that, Mary?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, the solicitation email is when, you're soliciting for a donation, you're actually asking. So that's going to be a hard ask where that's going to be the primary focus of the communication, whether it's a direct mail or an email. A soft ask you should kind of include in almost every communication, but it's going to be a lot more subtle. It's going to be, oh, by the way, if you're so inclined, here's, you might be sending an informational letter and there might be a paragraph down there that has a link, if you really want to support, what I'm talking about, here's a link, and you could even put it in the PS. That's often a tactic too, because as a donor is reading, they should always, if it occurs to them, gosh, I'd really like to give them, it should be pretty easy to find. So now we're getting a few questions here.
Yeah.
So
We had a great, I'll take the first two.
Great.
You had Andy had a great question, and Chris also had a great question. Someone said, how do you avoid being repetitive in a follow-up thank you phone call on a written note? You're not. That's the thing. That there's a great thing called the law of 7, or the marketing mix of 7, right? Which talks about you have to break down someone's walls 7 times to get a meeting with them. But I would also say there's an old adage that you can't overthink a donor. You want to shoot for about thanking the donor for about 7 times, right? That they get an automated email with you, and then a receipt through the mailing. They get a handwritten thank you note to you, and a phone call, right? Right, and depending on the size of the organization. Now, so you're not going to be you will not overthink a donor, right? I would say, and if you are, it's a good problem to have. They're going to be deeply grateful that you are so grateful. Now, we talked about the results of thank you calls. Who would you typically expect to be making those calls? Fundraisers, executives, volunteers? I would say a mix, Chris. So what you would want to do ideally is map out, depending on the size of your organization and what types of gifts you receive per year. You would want to look at, if you're a large organization, I think you should be calling everyone who has $1,000 or more that they've given to you. They've expressed their desire. Only 40% of Americans can make an unsolicited $1,000 gift. And then in the way we purchase things, we do typically necessity, emergency, necessity, want, and a luxury, and then a gift, right? So then Blackbaud did a study that if someone gives you a $1,000 donation or more, they have the capacity to give that to you in the next 18 months, 10x of that, right? So you would want to be calling them at minimum and utilizing key volunteers. So you kind of want to break up your donor acknowledgement process and the size of your organization, and it's important you can involve anyone or everyone. So great.
Right. And you can mix up a phone call, and what I used to like to do too with donors is kind of at the end of the day, I would make a point of maybe scratching out just on a little note cards that are handy to get for your nonprofit, a quick handwritten thank you note to someone who's new or even random, or someone who's giving regularly is really wonderful. And it's so rare that someone gets a little handwritten note, but it means an awful lot.
Totally. Someone asked, with limited resources and limited bandwidth, Mary, you worked at a small nonprofit. Could you answer that? How would you utilize this information for a small nonprofit?
As far as the welcome email series?
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got the bandwidth or the ability and you have the software to go ahead and do a series of emails, you can sometimes automate them. That's okay. Make sure that those emails are personalized, though. Don't just, it's really doesn't feel very good to get an email or a letter that says, "Dear friend," right? Because then it's a mass email. And that's completely possible in most systems to have a welcome series of emails. And it is good if you're small to try to plan that out ahead, do as much upfront work as you can. The point is to try to do something and try to get that first 90 days, something in there that first 90 days for that second gift. I know it's hard to do a lot of the time when you have got a narrow bandwidth.
Sarah asked, add-on calls, what do you recommend that are said in the initial gratitude call? So what I would recommend, per Penelope Burks, recommendations is one, that you've received the gift, that it is going to the program that they have desired, and that you're incredibly grateful. So if you're interested, Penelope Burke would be the thought leader, and I did some research on that. That's what I would typically do for those phone calls. So thank you all for your time. I know it was a lot. If you have any other questions, please don't hesitate. I know we're coming up to time here. I have a few announcements. One being that we have an offer for you. Surprise, we took our own advice.
We're not asking for money.
No, Caitlin is going to drop this in the chat. We have a free ebook for you. So we'll send that your way along with a copy of today's slides, which is pretty fun. Tune in. We have a few things coming up. Our next Denver office hours is going to be on May 24th. Topic to be determined. I have some good things in the works in terms of who we might interview. It may be on CRMs. It may be on plan giving. We'll have to see. Additionally, we have a few other events coming up that Caitlin's going to drop in the chat since my tech is still not working. So that'll go out in email. And last but not least, if you would like to spend time with myself and or Mary, anyone from the AmPhil team, we would be overwhelmed and excited to just spend time with you and answer any questions that you might have. Thank you all so much. Thanks for bearing with the tech. We really, really appreciate it. This was awesome.
Someone was asking about calling your donors, AM or PM. Doesn't really matter. Just call them. Leave a message. They're happy to get a message too. So that's really the bottom line today. Just reach out and don't be afraid. They're happy to hear from you. They want to hear from you.
Absolutely.
So, great.
Awesome. We'll be following up with an email. Thank you all so much. You guys are great.